Trumpism has infected the Supreme Court in ways that were unimaginable before Donald Trump, but some of which were actually happening before Trump. It is inconceivable that Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas and both of their wives suddenly became rabid, right-wing, Trumpian Republicans only at the emergence of candidate Trump. We now know that the financial corruption of Clarence Thomas, the outright selling of his Supreme Court seat, or at least what we can all agree is the financial exploitation of his seat on the Supreme Court, has been happening for decades. Clarence Thomas was just never admitting it. Clarence Thomas was violating the rules of financial disclosure for Supreme Court justices and claiming that as a Supreme Court justice, it was impossible for him to understand these very simple rules that you do not have to go to law school to understand. Rules that anyone could understand on their first reading. Clarence Thomas's defense has been the kind of defense that disqualifies you as a Supreme Court justice. It's the claim that he is just too stupid to understand these very simple ethical rules. That would mean he is, by his own confession, too stupid to be a Supreme Court justice. But Trumpism means never having to say you're sorry for being stupid. So everyone in Republican politics accepts Clarence Thomas's defense that I was too stupid to understand the ethics rules that apply to Supreme Court justices. And just when we think we know it all about Justice Thomas, there's more. The Senate Judiciary Committee released new information revealing that Clarence Thomas took 3 more flights than previously known on the private jet of Republican mega donor Harlan Crow. That's 3 more flights than the public knew about when data compiled by the watchdog group Fix the Court showed that Clarence Thomas received at least more than $4 million in gifts between 2004 and 2024. In the same 2 decades, no other justice reported even $500,000 in gifts or $250,000 in gifts. Samuel Alito came in second with roughly $210,000 worth of gifts in that same 2 decades. The records do not show the purpose of Clarence Thomas's trips on that private jet. The Washington Post estimated that such flights might have cost between $500,000 and $625,000. As Joe Biden said this weekend in Los Angeles, if Donald Trump is elected president, he will have at least 2 Supreme Court seats to fill. President Biden didn't specify which seats, but it's easy to see how quickly Donald Trump and rich Republicans would be able to purchase Clarence Thomas's Supreme Court seat from Justice Thomas by providing him with the fabulously wealthy lifestyle that Justice Thomas so openly craves. Justice Thomas is 75 years old. Donald Trump would make him an offer he couldn't refuse. The golden motorhome offer, the unlimited private jets wherever you want to go offer for the rest of your life, multi-million-dollar income by sitting on corporate boards, making speeches to closed-door Republican gatherings. And Donald Trump would make Samuel Alito an offer that Samuel Alito's wife would not let him refuse, according to her recently recorded comments about how much she hates her husband's job. Donald Trump would replace at least 2 Supreme Court justices in their mid-70s with extreme right-wing Republican lawyers like, say, 44-year-old Joshua Hawley, who could serve on the United States Supreme Court comfortably for another 40 years, where he could do much more damage than he tries to do now in the United States Senate. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He is also the author of The Scheme, How the Right Wing Used Dark Money to Capture the Supreme Court. Senator Whitehouse, I've been wanting to get your reaction to what Joe Biden said this weekend about those 2 possible Supreme Court justices, which is not something that we in the media had been focusing on, the possibility that there could be openings. But as soon as we heard him say it, we could see how that deal would be made for those 2 openings.
Yeah, and there's a history of making deals for openings. Justice Kennedy left in what looked an awful lot like a deal to put his former clerk, Brett Kavanaugh, on the court. And it's customary for Republican justices who claim to be nonpartisan to wait until there is a Republican president before they retire and create a vacancy. I think more importantly, what it reminds the American people of is what the stakes are of another Trump presidency and an even more rightward, entitled, and extremist Supreme Court. Just the move from 5 to 4 to 6 to 3 made a profound difference in the court's behavior. If it were to go, let's say, to 7 to 2, I think a rogue court would become a downright berserk court, and it's very hard to get rid of them because they have these lifetime appointments. So it's a very real threat to the country to have Trump have more appointments to this court.
Senator, have I oversimplified the Clarence Thomas defense, which to me seems to be, I couldn't possibly understand these complicated rules for financial disclosure for Supreme Court justices. This is someone who has to analyze antitrust cases and all, as we know, all sorts of law that is far more complex than these very simple English language financial disclosure requirements. I mean, that just seems like a defense that disqualifies you from being a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, well, his first line of defense is to say nothing at all, just to be mute. So he's never said a thing officially about what his situation was as regards his wife's role in the insurrection when he was ruling on cases that related to investigation of the insurrection. He just refused to answer, refused to engage. So nothing there, just mute silence. Then you move on to the filings that he's made. When he's caught making mistakes, he makes these weird partial corrections that he knows aren't complete, and then says that his failure to file very obvious requirements was inadvertent. You know, if a lawyer made to Justice Thomas the argument that their mistake was inadvertent, they'd be taken to task by Justice Thomas. And so it's a double standard as to what they demand of the bar around them and the way they behave themselves. And then very simple things like understanding that when a $250,000 debt is forgiven for your motor coach, that is income. All you have to do is read the plain language of the statute and the disclosure rule to know that. And he doesn't seem to have managed to file his proper disclosure, and we're investigating whether he's managed to file his proper taxes.
And this is a judge who is in the federal appeals chain of tax evasion cases and of cases of failure to comply with taxes, both civil and criminal cases that find their way up there, where he has to be the ultimate interpreter of tax law as it applies to in that case.
We are going to find out what the facts are, and they look very much like a Supreme Court justice has committed tax fraud, and we're going to get to the bottom of all of these disclosure violations. But I've gone to the Senate floor to disclose what happened when executive branch and legislative branch officials engaged in similar disclosure violations. They were prosecuted. They pled guilty to criminal charges. So we're dealing with very serious matters about which we have a Supreme Court justice who is simply not providing honest answers.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for starting off our discussions tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.